Have you ever allowed a chilling thought to drift through the periphery of your consciousness? A suspicion so cold it makes the very marrow of your bones ache with dread? Imagine, if you will, that the person sitting across from you at this very moment, the one whose smile you have known for a lifetime, and whose habits are as familiar to you as your own breath, has been replaced. Suppose that behind those well-known eyes an entirely different entity is peering out, mimicking every gesture and tone with surgical precision, yet lacking any shred of the soul that once resided there. In the ancient, mist-shrouded traditions of Japan, there exists a creature born of this very nightmare, a being known as the Amanojaku. To the casual observer or the modern storyteller, the Amanojaku is often dismissed as a mere trickster, a diminutive goblin characterized by a stubborn streak or a penchant for minor mischief. However, such a sanitized interpretation does a grave disservice to the sheer existential horror of its true nature. The Amanojaku is not a playful spirit, but a profound spiritual parasite, a creature that slides into the microscopic fractures of the human psyche to subvert our most sacred impulses. It is the architect of inversion, a force that transmutes genuine kindness into jagged malice and weaves threads of hatred into the fabric of love. In our contemporary world, the word is tossed around lightly to describe a contrary personality, yet few comprehend the abyssal depths from which this entity emerged. What we are about to explore is far removed from the safe confines of a children's fable. This is a journey into a primal, shape-shifting darkness that, even now, may be sharpening its claws within the shadow of your own neighbor, or perhaps in the unmapped corners of your own heart. To truly grasp the magnitude of this threat, we must trace the lineage of the Amanojaku back to the very dawn of creation, specifically to the tumultuous era of the Japanese gods. Its origins are inextricably linked to Susanoo no Mikoto, the god of storms and the sea, a deity whose volatile temperament often brought chaos to the celestial plains of Takamagahara. Legend tells us that when Susanoo was consumed by a particularly virulent surge of internal fury, a concentrated miasma of divine rage and sorrow, he exhaled a powerful dark breath. From this exhale of pure negativity was born the goddess Amanojaku. According to the Wakan Sansai Zue, an encyclopedic masterpiece of the Edo period, Amanojaku was a creature of singular grotesqueness. She possessed the torso of a human, but her face was a terrifying bestial mask with a nose so unnervingly long it defied nature, accompanied by ears of immense size and tusks that could rend the spirit asunder. More terrifying than her physical form, however, was her inherent psychological disposition. She possessed the uncanny ability to perceive the deepest desires and thoughts of others, yet she used this insight for the sole purpose of contradiction. If a person sought peace, she brought turmoil. If they sought construction, she brought ruin. The Amanojaku is the direct spiritual descendant of this primordial goddess, inheriting her legacy of divine rebellion. It is, in every sense, a crystalline manifestation of pure, unadulterated evil, a being that exists as a permanent protest against the harmony of the universe. The name itself suggests a demon that opposes the very heavens, a fundamental insurgent against the cosmic order. Let us now dissect the most harrowing of all Amanojaku legends, the tale of Urikohime, or the Melon Princess, through a lens of profound psychological and atmospheric detail. Deep within a valley where the mountains seemed to lean in, close to eavesdrop on the living, there lived an elderly couple who discovered a beautiful girl inside a giant melon. This girl, Urikohime, was the light of their twilight years, a maiden of such purity and skill at the loom that she seemed more like a celestial gift than a mortal child. One fateful afternoon, when the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the old couple had departed for the village, leaving the princess alone, the silence was shattered by a low, vibrating voice from outside the door. It was the Amanojaku. It did not attack with brute force instead. It began a slow, calculated siege of her will. It spoke in a voice that sounded like a distorted echo of her own thoughts, pleading for just a crack of the door to be opened. Every refusal from the princess was met with a more ingenious manipulation, a layering of false vulnerability that eventually eroded her caution. In the versions of the story that have been whispered through generations, the sequence of events that follows is nothing short of a nightmare rendered in flesh. Once inside, the Amanojaku did not merely end the girl's life. It sought to erase her very existence. It committed an act of unspeakable desecration, effectively terminating her vital functions. And then, with the precision of a master craftsman, peeling the skin from her body. The creature then draped this stolen visage over its own warped frame, stepping into her identity with a chilling fluidity. When the sun began its slow descent, casting long skeletal shadows across the floorboards, the elderly couple returned to find what they believed was their beloved daughter. Sitting at her loom, the sound of the shuttle moving back and forth, clack. Swish, clack seemed identical to the rhythm they had always known. Yet beneath that familiar skin, the Amanojaku was silent, its eyes gleaming with a predatory triumph as it mimicked her voice and her gentle mannerisms. This story serves as a visceral metaphor for the fragility of the self. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that our identities are merely garments that can be stripped away and worn by a monster, and that those who love us most might be incapable of sensing the presence of the interloper. Pause for a moment and reflect on your own interactions. Have you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to sabotage a relationship that you cherish, or to utter a biting remark to someone who has offered you nothing but warmth? Perhaps you have encountered an individual whose every word seems designed to derail a conversation or to undermine the emotional stability of a group. Yet they do so with a smile that never reaches their eyes. If these scenarios resonate with you, consider the possibility that you are not dealing with a simple personality clash, but with the lingering influence of the Amanojaku's shadow. In the realm of behavioral science, we often discuss the concept of psychological reactance, the instinctive urge to do the opposite of what is requested in order to preserve one's sense of autonomy. The Amanojaku, however, represents this phenomenon, escalated to the level of a metaphysical weapon. They are masters of the counter-narrative, possessing a preternatural ability to identify the precise moment when an individual is most vulnerable to betrayal. They don't just act out of spite. They act with a strategic cruelty intended to dismantle the target's mental architecture. When a person reaches out in a moment of profound isolation, the Amanojaku-influenced entity will deliberately turn away, not out of indifference, but to maximize the sting of rejection. This is an active predatory form of dominance that aims for nothing less than the total erosion of the victim's spirit. In the sacred architecture of Japanese Buddhism, the physical representation of the Amanojaku is both fascinating and deeply symbolic. If you walk through the hallowed halls of ancient temples and look at the towering statues of the four heavenly kings, the guardians of the cardinal directions, you will find the Amanojaku in a position of utter humiliation. They are the small, muscular demons being trampled under the heavy, armored feet of deities like Bishamonten. At first glance, this appears to be a simple depiction of good triumphing over evil, yet a closer inspection reveals a more complex truth. Despite being crushed by the weight of divine justice, the faces of these demons are often carved with an expression of defiant mockery. Their teeth are bared in a grin that suggests they are merely biding their time, waiting for the gods to blink or for the human heart to falter. They represent the kleshas, the mental pollutions, and worldly desires that cloud our judgment and disrupt the social order. The fact that they are suppressed but not destroyed is a sobering reminder from the ancients the darkness within us can be managed, but it can never be fully eradicated. The weight of the god's foot is the weight of our own constant vigilance, the necessity of using our reason to pin down the chaotic impulses that threaten to lead us into the abyss. In the digital landscape of the 21st century, the Amanojaku has found a vast new playground. No longer confined to the shadows of mountain villages or the footstools of temple statues, these entities have migrated into the currents of the internet. They manifest in the form of trolls who derive visceral pleasure from extinguishing the joy of others, or in those who use anonymity to disseminate poisonous falsehoods aimed at destroying a person's reputation. Just as the Amanojaku of legend wore the skin of the melon princess, modern digital Amanojaku hide behind fabricated personas and avatars to infiltrate communities and sow discord. They are the ones who find a story of hope and reflexively inject a dose of nihilism, or who target a vulnerable individual with the sole intent of witnessing their psychological collapse. They do not seek to build or to contribute. Their only currency is the chaos they create. In this age of information, the Amanojaku has evolved into a viral intelligence, a form of spiritual malware that exploits the vulnerabilities in our social connectivity to turn us against one another. How, then, does one defend against an enemy that feeds on the very fabric of our reality? The lore suggests a singular, powerful defense: the act of observation and the refusal to react. In the stories, the Amanojaku's power evaporates the moment its true nature is acknowledged. Its primary weapon is the confusion it generates. It relies on your anger, your frustration, and your despair to sustain its existence. To fight an Amanojaku is to give it exactly what it wants. Instead, the most potent weapon is a cold, unwavering clarity. When you sense an uncharacteristic malice or a deliberate attempt to subvert the truth, you must step back and observe the intent rather than the action. By refusing to engage emotionally, you deny the creature the sustenance it requires. It is like holding up a mirror to a shadow. The shadow has no substance of its own and can only exist in the absence of light. When the light of conscious awareness is shown directly upon the Amanojaku's manipulations, it becomes painfully aware of its own hollow nature and eventually flees back into the darkness. Consider this question deeply. If your closest confidant, the person you trust with your very life, began to subtly change their patterns of behavior, what would be your breaking point? At what point would you stop seeing them and start seeing the intruder? Is it a change in the cadence of their voice, or perhaps a sudden lack of empathy in a moment where it was once abundant? Your answer to this question is more than just a hypothetical exercise. It is the blueprint for your own psychological sanctuary. It is the boundary that the Amanojaku cannot cross provided you remain vigilant. The Amanojaku is a master of the weak point. It waits for the moments when you are exhausted by the pressures of life, when you are feeling the sharp sting of envy, or when you are drowning in the gray waters of self-doubt. It is in these moments of fragility that the creature whispers into your mind, convincing you that your friends are your enemies and that your virtues are actually your greatest flaws. You might think you are acting on your own accord, but you could very well be moving to the rhythm of a puppeteer you cannot see. The path to victory over this ancient demon is not through external combat, but through a rigorous, almost ascetic discipline of the self. You must constantly audit your own thoughts, questioning the origin of every flash of spite and every urge to deceive. In the final analysis, the story of the Amanojaku is a confrontation with the shadow, as described by Jungian psychology. It is the repository of everything we deny about ourselves, the selfishness, the cruelty, and the urge to destroy. When we refuse to acknowledge our own capacity for darkness, we allow that darkness to take on a life of its own, manifesting as the Amanojaku. The creature is not an outside invader so much as it is an unintegrated part of our own humanity. To defeat it is to integrate it, to acknowledge that the potential for being the Amanojaku lies within all of us. Only by acknowledging this can we ensure that we never find ourselves wearing the skin of another, or worse, becoming the one who is replaced. Always remember that the Amanojaku is listening even now to the internal dialogue you are having with this information. Perhaps a part of you is whispering that this is all nonsense, a mere collection of outdated superstitions. Ask yourself, is that your voice? Or is it the voice of the one who fears being discovered? The darkness only has power in the silence. Once the name is spoken and the nature of the beast is understood, the spell begins to break. The light of truth does not need to be aggressive, it simply needs to be present. In its presence, the shadows have nowhere to hide. And the Amanojaku, stripped of its disguise, is revealed for what it truly is, a lonely, hollow echo of the god's forgotten rage. May your heart remain a fortress of clarity, and may the light you carry within always be enough to keep the shadows at bay. Until we meet again in the next chapter of The Unknown, remain watchful, for the world is rarely as it seems. Until we meet again in the next story. If you have any feelings about this tale or any mysterious experiences of your own, please let me know in the comments. Your voice becomes the light that illuminates the next darkness.